No, of course your health is serious. The reason I did this was to make people take the right things seriously and give you tools to see what isn't going to help you. A lot of people stand to profit off you taking the wrong things really seriously. So I'm just trying to cut through those narratives. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the show. So for today, I made a list of 8 things that I learned the hard way. I try to include the things that I learned the hardest way in this, if that makes sense. I'm really not sure that there are many people that have fucked up in their quest for fitness quite as many times as I have. And the people that have, I'm sure they're out there wandering through the fitness industry as well. I have a theory that the majority of people in the fitness industry are actually the people that made so many mistakes and got so angry about it that they insisted on making an income about it. Like, you know how you can take somebody who has emotionally scarred you to court and you get a payout and that whole system? I think it's basically the same thing. I want to kind of give you a brief background and I'll eventually kind of dive into my whole fitness journey. And I haven't put that out on any social media yet just because I don't think I'm ready to fully disclose different details and certain things that I went through that very, very few people know about, even people close to me. At some point, I'm sure I will be a little bit more comfortable to do that and really go through the evolution of how I got to where I am now. And it was a long, hard road to get here. I can confidently say that I am the most comfortable with myself and the most comfortable with food and the happiest I've ever been and the least stressed I've ever been about the whole thing. In turn, I have the body composition that I wanted for so long and killed myself for. So just to give you a little bit of background, the first time I dieted, I was 11 years old. So I'm an elderly 25 years old at this point. I feel like a fossil, even though I know that I'm not actually too old, but it's been a long time. For most of that time, I was continuing to just try different things and learn as much as I possibly could. I got information from anywhere it was available. Now, I feel that it's my goal and also my responsibility in a way to help people avoid the decade or more that I just spent pissed off at my own physiology and my own body. And I was so deep in the cycle of dieting and just exercising so excessively. I couldn't even see up. It's like when you get tumbled by a wave. That was my dieting and fitness and whatever you want to call it journey for, again, 10 plus years probably. I don't know everything and I can't help you avoid every single hard lesson, but these lessons really fucked with me. So at the very least, you can avoid these ones and maybe you won't spend as much time just spinning your wheels as I did. That is all I can really ask. I have 8 things listed in front of me and I'll kind of count them down. These are somewhat of an order, counting down to the biggest one, but I've so been there. And I want to make sure that I also give you a little bit of background and solutions so you can actually not just know what I did wrong, but know how to fix it, because it doesn't do much if you know that you're not doing the right thing, but you don't know what to do instead. I want to kind of get right into it, jump in, and we'll go through these, starting with number 8. So this one was interesting for me to learn. This one was that you can't spot reduce fat, but with that, you can kind of shape your body in a different way. You can spot gain muscle. That is so different from spot reducing fat. Depending on how you hold fat, abs are a great example. Some people will have visible abs at a very high body fat percentage, and then other people will be extremely low body fat percentages and they won't ever have a 6-pack just based on how they store fat genetically. And there's not much you can do about that. However, what I don't see being talked about as often is that you can kind of shape your body through muscle gain. The biggest mistake that I see with this is people will try to, I think the really common one is you can make your butt bigger. And I don't care your gender, I don't care how you identify. I think everybody wants a really nice ass. So people will make the mistake of dieting down. So they'll be in a calorie deficit and they're really trying to put on size. This is the misconception that you need to be dieting to reach any body composition goal. And that's just not true. If you want to add muscle, size, you do have to eat enough to support building tissue, which typically means eating in at least a little bit of a surplus. all that is going to require is you eating a little bit more than your body typically burns. Now, that being said, it is a slow process. And I think that's why people get really discouraged with it. But you can most certainly put on muscle in different areas of your body to try to shape it. Another thing I'll see is if you build out your lats, which are the muscles kind of underneath your armpits towards the back of your body, that will give you the illusion of a smaller waist. And I've seen a lot of bikini girls do this. Things like that will make a big difference in just how you appear overall. I spent so much time trying to spot reduce fat and try to do a million crunches in my bedroom, literally a million crunches in my bedroom. And I wasn't getting abs because I was barely eating. So I wasn't building any muscle. And I also was never going to see my abs by eating the way I was. But that's a whole different story. No, you cannot spot reduce fat. You can't get rid of fat and choose where it comes off of your body by exercising that area more. But you can put on muscle in certain areas in order to give certain illusions of how you want to look. And a decent coach, especially bodybuilding coaches, even my coach, Rob, is really, really good at this. You can kind of create the shape you want, but it has to be well-rounded. You have to have your diet in there as well. So that is my first one. And that was an interesting one because I learned it and just wouldn't believe it, which was interesting to look back on. My number 7 is that not all calories are created equal, but thermodynamics are created equal. This was the lesson that I think I probably learned for real the most recently with the flexible dieting trend that has been so popular. What we see is a lot of poor quality calories, but people will reach these aesthetic goals because their thermodynamics are in balance. All that means is that their calorie burn may be, higher than they're expending. So they're losing weight or they are, gaining weight if that's their goal. But you feel like garbage, you're inflamed, you're not recovering, you're not getting the nutrients you need. And that's where the problem is. When people say, a calorie is a calorie, they are right in a sense. And I don't want to discredit that because that is true. Calories are king. However, there are so many videos on YouTube. Jordan Syatt has a great one. He eats a Big Mac every single day on a dieting phase and still loses weight. So I'm pretty sure you can just type in Jordan Syatt Big Mac challenge, something to that effect. He eats a Big Mac every single day, yet he loses weight. People have a really hard time believing that. And the clean eating, paleo, all of that is such a strong trend, which is great because those people are probably getting a ton of micronutrients and vitamins, minerals, and their fiber, and that's all awesome. However, there's also the calorie balance side. So you can eat paleo cookies all day long and end up in a massive surplus and gain a bunch of weight. That is how it works. However, you can also eat Twinkies all day and you can lose weight. The lesson that I had the hardest time learning is that I really am more reactive to a shitty diet than I ever wanted to admit to myself. I was the IIFYM queen. I know how many calories are in a serving of goldfish. I know how many gummy worms I can eat during training and still have enough carbs left. I macroed so freaking hard and I felt like garbage. I couldn't figure out why. My sleep was shit. I didn't have any energy. I was so foggy. I really could not admit to myself that I just needed to eat better. What I did instead is I bought all of these fake foods at the grocery store, these super low calorie yogurts and 0 calorie noodles and all of that. And I would try to just eat for volume because that was so trendy too. What I found was, I could eat a lot, but I wasn't getting anything that I needed. My protein intake was probably garbage too. And vegetables, I purely ate them if they could bulk up a meal. That was it. Oh my God, I felt like shit. It was so bad. And that's the balance that people need to find is everything in moderation is so cliche and it's so annoying to hear because especially when you're in a dieting cycle, moderation is just out the window. But if you can find the balance where most of your food is decent, it doesn't have to be perfect. You really don't have to be able to afford or buy, grass-fed unicorn every single week in order to eat good quality food. The best you can do is the best you can do, and that's totally fine. And if anybody tells you otherwise, tell them to fuck off. That's the most annoying thing I'll ever hear is if you're not eating everything organic or you're eating frozen vegetables instead of fresh or whatever other bullshit, that it's like not even worth trying. And that drives me up a wall because not everybody is going to be able to go to Whole Foods and buy this grass-fed $29 a pound beef. So that just means like you shouldn't try it all? No. It's fucking stupid. So that being said, the best quality calories you can get in, do it. I have even sort of adopted, which I do have a more sensitive stomach than most people. So you may have no trouble digesting gluten, dairy, anything like that. And if you don't have a problem with it, don't make up a problem where there isn't one. I found a lot of success in buying higher quality versions of the junk food that I really like. I'm about as scary as it gets about 10 days out from when my cycle starts. If there's not some form of cookie in my face, I'm really angry. I'm not a happy person. So I buy the Whole Foods freaking $7 whatever cookies because they don't hurt my stomach and I feel better. And that's kind of the choice that I've made, is to spend a little bit more money on those because of the way I feel. You're going to find your own version of that. It doesn't have to be my version. It doesn't have to be someone else's version. The quality of calories do matter. Just because you can reach your aesthetic goals with trash food doesn't really mean you should. And if you're someone that notices the effects, it probably means you need to pay even a little bit more attention. So this next one, this is a good one. Whew. So this is going to hurt a lot of feelings. So a bunch of unsustainable plans, one after another, does not equal a long-term plan. I know that sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. People's entire dieting plan sometimes, whether they know it or not, is to literally just pick a fad, go 0 to 100, lose weight, get bored of it, and maybe gain some weight back, maybe even not, but then you're like kind of on to the next. And that's not any way to learn about yourself or any way to sustain any progress. You can usually tell if you're on some sort of like trendy or fad diet based on how exciting and ridiculous it is. So if you're like cutting out a whole food group and you are having to buy all these like weird shakes and all of that stuff, that's weirdly motivating. And I won't deny that. There's something about some ridiculousness within a diet that makes it really attractive because it's a big challenge and there's a lot to it. You're all in. But it's a lot harder to be that way with something that's like, yeah, I'm going to have a treat if I'd like, but I'm going to have a reasonable amount. That's not really as attractive to a lot of people, and I can understand that. However, if you kind of think about yourself really quick and you look back on your dieting history or your fitness history, your training history, whatever, and you've done like 10 different things in the past few years and you haven't stuck with any of them for more than, 6 months, you may have this problem. Sometimes it's really hard to recognize. You're like, oh, I just haven't found something that works. But have you given anything a long enough shot, or have you tried anything reasonable enough that you maybe could stick with? And I can certainly say that on my end, with my personal mistakes, you could have said those exact words to me and I would have been like, no, that's ridiculous. I'm just like trying things out. Unfortunately, that was the truth for me. I was never sticking with anything because I was choosing completely unsustainable methods that didn't allow me to live my life. And so obviously I was on one plan to the next because I couldn't be on a juice cleanse and go out in college. That doesn't work that way. So I would kind of just hop on whenever was convenient. So this is something that I really recommend. I make all of my clients create a success list. All that is a list of things that work for them almost 100% of the time. That basically gives you a little roadmap to yourself. For me, like on my success list, I know if I don't drink water, like the first half of the day, I overeat at night. And that's just a trend that I've noticed with myself. I'll also notice that if I forget to eat in the first half of the day, just 'cause my hunger is so different from morning to night, that I will overeat at night as well. So that's something I have to be careful of. And that's on my success list. I have a whole list of things. All my clients have their own things. And it's completely personal. It's really specific. But what that allows you to do is sort of look back when things aren't going as well. So you can go, okay, things don't feel right now. I'm not really getting where I want to be. What is off? And you have something to refer to say, okay, oh, I'm no longer drinking water in the first half of the day. I haven't brought my water bottle to work in, a week. That makes sense. I'll do that tomorrow. And it gives you sort of a checklist, and you can tell how aligned you are with your goals based on how many things off your success list you're implementing. That is one of my favorite things. I push it on my clients like I have some sort of hidden agenda. Like I'm so aggressive with it because I really do believe it works. This one is lovely. So this is number 5. Any athlete that has been an extremely low body fat percentage year round with no bounce back, no repercussions, no health issues has been on drugs. I have personally known maybe 1 or 2 people that would fall into like the genetic freak category. However, they do exist. That being said, accepting that you may not want to do steroids or that you are not a genetic freak and that you may not fall into either of those categories is a hard thing. It's not easy to admit to yourself that you may never have abs year round. This is especially if you live a life that is not revolving around your aesthetics or your fitness or anything of the sort. You have a job that doesn't require those things. You have a family. You have priorities that are well above fitness. I would say if you have more than 2 priorities that are above fitness, you really have to manage your expectations. People take such offense to that. It's so hard because it's really not a negative thing. It's not a negative thing to not go do push-ups when your kid is sick. It's not a negative thing to skip a workout for a holiday with your family. It's not a negative thing to have to make money. And if you have to stay late at work and miss your workout, it is what it is. If you are kind of like sitting there wondering like where your priorities rank, I recommend writing them down. There's a book called Essentialism. It was one of the most life-changing books I've ever read because I was so bad at this. I swore up and down I had like 6 million priorities, and that just that's not how it works. If you have 1 million priorities, you're not going to make a ton of progress at any of them. There's that classic saying, it's like chase 2 rabbits, catch none. Well, if you're chasing 27 rabbits, you're definitely not going to catch any. For me personally, I really would not give myself a break. I had a lot going on a few years ago, and it was a really, really hard time in my life. And I was puffy. I was inflamed. I wasn't recovering. It was so obvious. I was struggling through every single workout, and I could not for the life of me admit to myself that I had things that I was taking care of above fitness, like really getting secure in my career and learning as much as I could and being the best coach I can. And I freaking love my dog. My dog had like this super minor surgery, and I didn't work out that day, and I felt so good with that. And I couldn't admit that that was the truth. So creating a priority list and really defining where whatever sort of goal you have falls on that list and being really freaking honest with yourself. If you have a really hard time doing this, kind of think of the extremes of it, the God forbid situations. What are you going to choose? And that can be helpful. And then once you make that list, knock everything off below 3 and don't focus on any of it besides your top ones. With that being said, if you can manage your expectations and hold yourself to a realistic standard, you're probably going to get a lot farther than you will if you hold yourself to an absolutely ridiculous standard and you're comparing yourself to people who do fitness for a living. You're probably going to be able to create a plan that gets you to where you can realistically be rather than just spinning your wheels, going for something that just might not make sense for you. So that was a hard one. That one's like kind of meh. I know this wasn't the most fun one to listen to, but managing your expectations and understanding kind of where your goals actually fall on your priority list is life-changing. I definitely recommend if you have not listed out your priorities and really, really taken some stock in what the top ones are, do it. It'll take 5 minutes. And if it takes more than 5 minutes, you needed to do it even more. All right. This is one of my favorites because I was the queen of this. Oh my God. I don't know about you, but I am ridiculously hard on myself for really no reason. Like I'm hard on myself about things that like just so are not worth the grief. So this is word for word what I wrote down. Every time you fuck up and you continue to fuck up only because you fucked up, you are fucking up. All I mean by this is that spiraling over the small mistakes you made, you have ice cream after dinner, you skip a workout, whatever it may be. It's never the initial quote unquote mistake that prevents people from reaching their goals. What prevents people from reaching their goals or causes people to lose the progress they've made is the spiral. This is especially true on like vacations or extended periods of time where maybe you're not quite where you want to be, your actions aren't really aligning with your goals, and people will take that and just run with it. Beating yourself up only makes it worse. And it's so hard to get out of that cycle once you're in it. And I was in it for years. This was like the theme of my being was I would be so perfect. I would, and quote unquote perfect. Like now I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you need to eat something. But I would eat what I thought was so well for so long in a row. And then I would like, God forbid, go get a pizza with my friends or whatever it was. And I would beat myself up over it like there was no tomorrow. And because of that, and being so hard on myself about this stupid thing that made no difference whatsoever, I would just double down. And then it would be, okay, well, fuck it. I'm getting ice cream now and I'm going to feel even worse. And it's like you almost make yourself feel worse on purpose to talk yourself out of doing it again the next day. And you swear you'll start Monday and you swear that this is the last time you'll ever go through this spiral. And it's just not, because then you finally do get yourself back to that like quote unquote perfection. And it just happens again because life is not just, pen and paper in a vacuum. And if you can find a way to prevent yourself from getting into that spiral and have kind of a go-to plan, oh my gosh. The way I like to put it is imagine if every time you made that mistake, that pizza or that extra ice cream or that extra cookie or whatever it was. Think about that amount of calories, right? So let's just give it an arbitrary number. Like maybe over the course of a year, it's 10,000 calories, just the mistakes, right? Then think about the spiral after and what that adds up to. It's gotta be triple minimum, right? So what if we just forgave ourselves? Nothing actually immoral about food. You didn't go out and cheat on your wife. You didn't run over a bunny. Like if we gave ourselves a break, we would save that, extra 30,000 calories a year and never have to, go back to that perfection because we just moved on. I have to say, with all the clients I've worked with, the journey to actually being able to forgive yourself and preventing that spiral is very different. For some people, it's going to be exposure to the things that send you down spiraling. I had a client, and this was one of my favorite moments as a coach to date. And she had such an issue with chocolate. It really controlled her. And it wasn't cute and funny. It was really messing with her. And every time she was around chocolate, she would eat so much of it and she would be so sick. And she would beat herself up, brutally. I spent so much time just with her, even just being on the phone and like way beyond what I would normally do with a client, just because she was so upset about it. And this wasn't, a binge eating disorder. This wasn't like a theme. It was just this chocolate. And she was really good about a lot of other things. And so what we did is I made her, that sounds so extreme. I suggested that she eats 3 squares of the chocolate bar and she does it 4 times a day. And she had alarms set. Even if she didn't want it, she ate it. It was crazy fast, like shockingly fast, even on my end. I was really surprised. She didn't care about it at all. It was totally allowed. And that is all she needed, was the permission from herself to eat it and that it would be okay. It was fine. And a lot of people, it will not be that simple. So please don't get me wrong there. All I'm saying is finding what you need to do to give yourself a little grace. Sometimes that's all it takes, is just learning how to forgive yourself, and you just prevent that cycle from just continuing. So this is number 3. Your friend's Holy Grail diet is probably not your Holy Grail diet. And with that, do not listen to somebody who works in the cubicle next to you about fitness, even if they look like a Greek god. This is the worst thing ever. And I see it so often. So yes, maybe they're super knowledgeable, but it's more likely that they're a jackass and you need somebody who can take your life into account when helping you find a plan. All I mean by that is that maybe the guy next to you is, say you're a dad, you're in your 40s, you have, social events and you have kids' soccer games and you have all of these things, right? The guy next to you in the cubicle is 25. He gets everything paid for by his parents. He doesn't actually have to work. He spends his spare money on Tren, and he has all the time in the world to sleep and recover and get a fake tan. What works for him is probably not going to work for you. No matter how legitimate his plan may be, it's not even close to conducive to your lifestyle. And that's the disconnect, is people say, oh, well, they know what they're talking about. And I'm not discrediting that whatsoever. Lots of people know what they're talking about. However, not a lot of people are trained to take your lifestyle into account and figure out, based on that, the strategies that are going to be most effective for you. The cubicle office advice for your nutrition plan is not the way to go. The person next to you is completely different from you. They likely have a completely different background, completely different genetics, and what works for them may not work for you. What really, really gets me is this is the holy grail mentality. And then what will happen is I'll see people say, oh, yep, so-and-so, this is it. They say it's the way to do it. It's the only way to do it. And then that particular way doesn't work for you. And you just assume like all hope is lost. At that point, of course, you're going to be discouraged. The diet didn't work for you. And if it's supposed to be the way and the only way and the best way, like what hope do you have? It just paints this picture that's so false. And it's really, really discouraging. So if you are somebody that this is a really big part of your life and you really do struggle with finding strategies that work for you, I just really cannot recommend going to someone that can take those lifestyle factors into account, dietitian, nutritionist, whatever it may be, somebody that you really trust and somebody that you've seen work with other people successfully and different avatars of people. My general point is finding someone that can adjust to your life is going to prevent you from feeling like a failure when you really didn't fail. It was just the wrong plan. How this related to me personally was I would just follow these people on Instagram, or even before that, like the Tumblr days and all of that. I would look at these people who, like Victoria's Secret models. I am 5'2", 5'3" if I wear a bun and they measure me wrong. I'm not walking down the Victoria's Secret runway anytime soon, even if they did bring it back. But yet, here I am, and I'm like, Candace Swanepoel, this is what I need to look like. Kendall Jenner, like, I can do that. Like, I will look like her. I'll just eat like half a strawberry all day. And that didn't work. Shocking, I know. I played high school sports. I worked 2 jobs in high school. I was a normal person. So therefore, not making millions of dollars a year based off how I looked. I know, shocking, but I was not. Therefore, that was just not the plan for me. And I'm really not dissing models. I know a lot of them are super healthy, especially nowadays. And that's so not my point. My point is that it is so different to be an actual supermodel than to be 15 years old on your laptop and being like, yeah, like what's going to work for me? Obviously, it's not the same. And that's an extreme example, but I encourage you to kind of look around to see who you do try to emulate, even if it's like kind of subtly or subconsciously, because if you're not even in the same ballpark, it can be so heartbreaking. That sucks. Like no one should feel like that because it's just not even fair. And it doesn't do you any good. So that was a hard one for me. That was a hard lesson. So we're at number 2. We are almost there. You cannot hate yourself into the body you want and enjoy it or make it last. I stand by this. I really, really do. I've worked with a lot of people at this point, right? I have never in my career seen somebody hate themselves or guilt themselves or shame themselves into the results they wanted and keep them. And I stand by that. I've seen people make a lot of progress with that as motivation. The rebound on that type of motivation is brutal. And I've seen it happen extremes. I've seen it happen where you just kind of end up where you started. But I do stand by the fact that I've never seen somebody purely motivated off of really not loving themselves and not giving themselves any grace sustain what they wanted. And for me, this was the back and forth and kind of the spiraling I talked about before. That was a big part of it. However, I never had a why that was positive. And this is something I came to terms with a few years ago and really had to work on to find something that motivated me that was positive. A lot of the things that originally got me started were extrinsic. They were judgment from others or wanting to look a certain way to go on vacation. It was like an outside validation thing, but it wasn't even really, people verbally telling me or people it was purely that I was just so afraid of people judging me and my body. And I was so uncomfortable with it. I would just like nose to the ground, just grind just out of purely fear. Obviously, I didn't get very far doing that. I remember I joined CrossFit, and this is kind of why my love for CrossFit goes so deep. I think, sure, there are a lot of people that take CrossFit way too far. There are a lot of people that do CrossFit in a crazy ass way. But CrossFit really was the first time I had any sort of motivation that wasn't just horrible. It wasn't negative. It wasn't based on fear. It wasn't based on fearing how I was going to look in a bathing suit. It was really based off of how I felt. And I felt good. I felt strong. I felt empowered. And this, especially for women and young girls, there is just something about really feeling strong that I think every single person should find that somehow. It doesn't have to be CrossFit, obviously. It could be anything, but something that makes you feel that way is worth tenfold what it'll cost you. Especially more recently in the past few years when I started competing and I started really taking strength training seriously. I get such a freaking kick out of being stronger than most of the men that I train. And that may not be as positive as it maybe should be, but it's honest and it's raw and it's real. And I like that, the dads of the gym will hype me up when I'm squatting because I'm squatting similar weights to them. And it's such a positive thing, especially because I am so lucky. My members are phenomenal people. I just remember this specific instance, and shout out to John. I don't even know if you're listening to this, but there was a man in the gym and we were all doing pig squats as a workout. And if you don't know what that is, consider yourself happy and lucky and move on with your life. However, if you've done it, it's pretty brutal. And it's just essentially a metric fuck ton of squats, really freaking heavy. I remember that I was doing similar weights to this man. He was so supportive of it. He was so happy. He was dying laughing with me. And I felt so proud of myself. I worked my ass off to get that strong. I really did. And I was so freaking happy that it was external validation. And I'm not discrediting that, but there was something about that was a turning point for me. And it was really nice to feel that strong. That was my new why, right? Is that feeling of like, oh, like I'm like so powerful. I can do this shit. It's going to come from something for you, but you have to kind of look for it. And that's the hardest part, is trying to find it. So if you don't have a reason that you're doing things that does come from something positive, I'm not saying you have to be in love with your fat rolls and like just praising your cellulite. I'm not saying that at all. And it's not realistic either. And I'll probably do an episode on body positivity at some point because I have a lot of thoughts about it. You do have to be able to love yourself while trying to improve yourself, or it's very, very difficult to execute to get results. So this one is my number one for very good reason. This was the hardest lesson I learned. This was the thing I did the longest and a lesson I had to relearn multiple times in multiple different ways. And this is also, I think, something that a lot of people can relate to. This is what I have written down word for word. You can stop obsessing over food, the scale, and dieting. The more relaxed you can become about it, the less fear can grow. The more you think about food, the more you're going to think about food. When I say that dieting and food and all of that consumed me, I don't say that lightly. I have been in every single one of my clients' shoes for the most part. I've been confused and angry and upset and just heartbroken. More people get to that point than I think is ever talked about. If you have never gotten to the point where you are absolutely obsessed with the whole thing, I absolutely praise you, and I absolutely hope you never have to understand what it's like. However, I have met a lot of people that weigh themselves 4 times a day that can't add, ketchup to their meal without weighing it out, not because they're in a bodybuilding competition, just because MyFitnessPal goes down for the day and you have a legitimate panic attack. It's literally like jail. It's being trapped in your own obsession. And then what will happen, or what happened to me, was I was so obsessed with food that I was so obsessed with food that I was so obsessed with food. I would be so afraid of overeating that I would obsess over the meal. And then after that meal was done, I would be so afraid of getting hungry again that I would obsess over the next meal. And then after I ate that meal, I would just be counting how many calories I had left for the day and trying to figure out how I could get the most full for those calories. God forbid I had to eat something that was unplanned, or I couldn't weigh it out, or it was just ridiculous is the best way to describe it. The obsession feeds the obsession. This is the story that I will leave you with that was another big turning point for me. So after I competed at the national level for the first time, I was so proud of myself, but I did a really hard weight cut for this meet. And unfortunately, the way things lined up, I didn't actually expect to qualify for this meet. So I did a local meet and cut for that. And then I went right back into a dieting phase when I realized that I made this meet and would have to make weight for that as well. So after that, I believe it was between 6 and 8 months of straight dieting, which is ridiculous because if a client ever told me they wanted to do that, I would never ever do that with a client. I can't even give you words. And I remember really close to the second meet. So this was towards the end of that time period. I remember I had worked out a super long time, probably between like 3 and 4 hours a day. I was no longer losing weight on normal amounts of calories. So I was eating, I don't even know, 1,200, 1,300 calories a day and working out for 3 to 4 hours. And I remember sitting in front of my fridge in my first apartment crying because I was so hungry and I couldn't eat if I wanted to make weight. And this meet was so important to me. I wanted to prove to myself that I could get up on that stage more than anything in the world. It really had nothing to do with actual competition. I wasn't competitive at that level by any means. I wasn't looking to medal, nothing of the sort. Purely the fact that I was so afraid to get up on that stage that I knew I had to do it for me. There's a lot to that story, and I really was not in a good place overall. Physically, mentally, anything. I was so hungry. After that meet, I immediately started to try to competitively, but also kind of for me, I was like, how can I sit closer to this weight for competition so that I don't have to do one of those really hard cuts again? How can I sort of not gain too much weight back and stick closer to this? But because I was dieting for so long, my body was in an absolute panic and my hunger was through the roof. I could eat a 5-course meal and I wasn't full. Stephanie Buttermore is phenomenal and she did a whole series on this. It's called All In on YouTube. I highly recommend it. There is one video that is, I think, like all in, like it's like a big review. It's like an hour long. It's worth it. If you're someone that feels you can never get full, you should watch this. But basically the idea of it is that you give up all food rules. You give up altogether. You completely give in. You eat until you are full. You eat whatever you want and you just absolutely let go. I really tried to not do that. I really tried to keep it under control. I tried to keep my weight closer to this, again, competition weight, but I was so unbelievably hungry because my body hadn't been fed in, oh my God, like hadn't been fed a normal amount of calories in like a year. So of course my body was fighting me back. And of course I was starving. With that, I got to a point that I remember vividly and I just gave up. And at the time in my head, I was like, I will just be overweight. Like that is just what I will, it's fine. Like I can't do this anymore. I can't try to control this anymore. I'm at a breaking point. I cannot do this to myself any longer. And I like accepted this fate that was like so dramatic, like so freaking dramatic of me. Like get over yourself. But I really did feel that way. And I remember I didn't track a single thing I ate. I didn't weigh myself. I worked out for fun. God forbid. Like it was like this novel idea to me. It's so stupid to think back on, but I genuinely just worked out for fun and I did whatever I wanted. And it was so freeing. And then I remember Robert, who I love dearly, kind of fighting with me a little bit because I was being so ridiculous. And he was 100% right. For context, I generally weigh about 140 pounds at the time. Remarkably, I'm a little bit lighter than that now that I've kind of come out of these mistakes a little bit, which is crazy to think about. I remember being like, yeah, I've probably gained like 20 or 30 pounds at this point. I'm probably around like 160, maybe a little bit more than that. I haven't weighed myself. Like I know that if I don't, control all these things that I just am going to gain weight. I know that like for a fact in my mind. And he brought the scale out to the living room and I stood on the scale and I was lighter than I had been the entire time I was trying to make weight because I just stopped giving a fuck. Because of that, I didn't have to overeat on everything that tasted good because I knew I was going to be able to have again. and I didn't have to think about the next meal because I knew it was coming and I knew I wasn't going to deprive myself of it. So sometimes I didn't even want it because I was actually listening to my hunger signals. I think I was like 139 or 140. I was right there. Like I was super close to where I needed to be anyway. I don't remember completely, but I remember being so overwhelmed emotionally. I believe I cried. I could not believe that letting go had produced this. I was so deep entangled in my own bullshit and if I didn't track every single thing and I didn't weigh myself every single day, that I was just going to like eat everything forever. And I was just going to gain weight infinitely. And eventually I would just explode. And like looking back, it is so insane to me, the amount of overwhelm that I had allowed myself to get consumed in with this. From that day on, I've never made anything off limits ever again. I'm leaner than I've ever been. It's crazy. The obsession feeds the obsession. And I know this is very long-winded, so I really appreciate if you're still here, but it's very real. And these mistakes are, again, fun to laugh about, but when you're in it, it is not fun and it's very serious and it can be so anxiety inducing. If you think I'm out of my mind and you have no idea what I'm talking about and you think I'm batshit crazy for being this upset, I am so happy that you feel that way. And I really hope that you can continue to just make good decisions that support your mental health and your food and all of that. But I didn't do that for a really long time. I hope that in this episode, you got something out of it that even if it wasn't the same mistakes I've made, maybe you realized something and maybe you had some sort of epiphany, thought, moment where you can think back on yourself and realize that maybe what you're doing is really just fighting a war with your biology and evolution, and your body is always going to win in the long term. If it thinks there's famine because you're not eating, it doesn't know that you're trying to go to the beach in 3 weeks. It knows that there's no food available and that it needs to motivate you to eat more. So it's just going to ramp up your hunger signals until you can't handle it anymore. If you find that this is something that is really, really controlling your life, the level that I got to was by no means normal. It was highly disordered, and that requires professionals. That is not something that your personal trainer is going to just like give you some vegetable advice about and it's going to be fixed. There's so many resources now. And even if you can't afford one-on-one help, I really, really recommend talking to somebody that you trust and just telling them what you're going through and letting people help, because it's brutal to fight that battle on your own. Yes, I am happier than I've ever been. I am in an amazing career because of it, and I've come a really long way. But this is the first time since I was 11 that I've felt this way. I really, really hope to God that no one struggles for that long. This episode was a little bit deeper than my normal episode, and I know it was a little bit heavier. I think it's important, and I think it's important to talk about, and I really will continue to try to be open about these things as much as I can, just because I think it's important that everyone knows that it happens, and getting caught in that cycle is really hard to get out of. So hopefully we'll be back on our normal bullshit next week. Hopefully we'll laugh a little bit more, all of that good stuff. But I appreciate you all more than you know. And if this helped you or you think it could help someone, I would appreciate the hell out of it if you shared it, if you told someone about it. Maybe it can help them. And other than that, I will see you next Monday. Bye, guys.